The Rant Podcast is brought to you by CubsInsider.com. Welcome to The Rant. Hello, fine fans of the Chicago Cubs. This is The Rant Podcast, and I am John Furlies, and I'm here with my co-host, Evan Altman. Evan, how are you?
I'm doing well. It has been quite the I guess is it a sabbatical? Is that what we've been on? We have not had this bad boy up for quite some time. So it's I don't know. I'm getting my sea legs back under me here.
Yeah, it's going to take a little while, I think. We've been gone for a while, but work and all the things that get in the way, but we're coming back. We're doing the show as just a podcast. It used to be a webcast and a podcast, but I got sick of seeing my face on the screen, so I thought we'd change that up and just do a podcast, and maybe that'll be better. But it's what's not going to be good is the Cubs postseason hopes, because as of today or yesterday, I guess, they have officially been eliminated. So we are starting the beginning of speculation season, which, we've had a lot of speculation season going on versus postseason the last few years.
Yeah, it's never a good thing when, and I mean, look, it's always in this, whatever we want to call it, industry or, little corner of the world that we inhabit when it comes to kind of blogs and podcasts and things like that. I think there's always a tendency to, for the fans to kind of lean toward what could be. So when we talk about free agency, the trade deadline, like those times are always far busier for us than the regular season. But that has been exacerbated by the fact that the Cubs really haven't given us anything of note outside of like a week or two of hot play here and there. So it's like we're kind of forced to look forward to these things because living in the present and dealing with what the team has done on a regular basis has not been all that fun for the last few years now. So, I guess I'm looking forward to it, but at the same time, I'm kind of not, because I'm worried about some of the things they may or may not do, and that we'll just end up back in the same spot. So, we'll see.
Yeah, fun and the Cubs haven't been a real kind of like they haven't coexisted well together. And it's interesting. I went to several games this year. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. Evan, you live in Brownsburg, Indianapolis?
Yeah, Indianapolis adjacent.
And so we get up to Chicago frequently. You get up there more than I do, but I try to get up there once a summer with my family, and I did that again. And I'll tell you, it was so interesting going to the Cubs game because they weren't doing well when we went up there, and yet it's just packed. And it's kind of like the Cubs are like the game is going on, but it feels like there's like the attendees of the game are like out there just kind of partying. And this isn't everybody. I mean, there are definitely people who are paying attention to the game, but like out in the bleachers, it was just kind of like, it's just like a party. And the fact that the Cubs were playing was just kind of like a thing that was going on, and it needed to happen for everyone to come together at Wrigley Field. And it felt really like, is this the dream that Ricketts had? Like, is this what he's wanted? It's just to fill the stadium with as many people as possible, and who cares why they're there, as long as they're spending a ton of money and having fun, whether it's watching the Cubs or whether it's just being in Wrigley Field, drinking beers and having a big party. And it felt like that's what was kind of going on there. It was a little depressing, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I will say this though. So I was up there this past Friday. They actually won, but it was like, and it was still a little on the warm side for me, right? Like I'm really concerned that we're gonna have another one of these falls where like we never really had fall. It's just gonna go from summer straight into winter, because I mean it's been in the 90s pretty routinely here, which not abnormal for you perhaps, but for the Midwest, now that, and I mean obviously you're a Midwest guy originally, so you know how it goes. But mid-September, late September, we're not supposed to be pushing 85 plus and, having to wear a tank top all day long with shorts. And so that's a little bit weird, but still Friday was beautiful. Like it was maybe 85,
Nice.
sunny, but not oppressively so, not humid, anything like that. And that place might have been half full. Like maybe even the paid attendance was like 29,000,
Really?
and there were even 20,000 people there.
The party's over. Well, all
Um,
the kids are back in school.
well, true, but still, like the second to last Friday, right? It's a Friday afternoon game. The bleachers weren't even close to full. The lower bowl wasn't close. It was maybe half, and so it was a little bit weird. And then our mutual friend Tommy, who lives in the area, he's even been saying though lately, it's been like tough because he parks cars in the neighborhood there, and he's saying like it's abnormally slow, right, for what you'd expect for being the weather being as nice as it's been and everything else. And so there were a few other things going on, right? Riot Fest was happening. I don't think based on my attendance there, I would go ahead and say there's not a ton of crossover between Riot Fest attendees and Cubs attendees,
Maybe
but
not. A
but
little.
it is something going on. And again, I was at both, so I suppose I'm probably not the only one who would. And as a matter of fact, my childhood next door neighbor was also at Riot Fest and is also a huge Cubs fan. But he goes all day, and he didn't go Thursday night. But so that's one other person who would be kind of a crossover in that regard. So, but that's why, like, I'm still so here's you're old when you do something like that. Like I took off work, I drove up to Chicago, I went to the Cubs game, I went to Riot Fest, and I'm still like 2 days later, still feeling like I'm about a million miles behind. So that's how you've gotten old. Like back in the day, I could have done that and partied for 3 days straight. Now I'm like, man, I had like 4 beers over there, 5 beers, maybe all throughout the entire day. And I'm like, I'm so beat
You're
up
hungover.
from being on my feet. Yeah, it's awful. But no, it was
So, y-
cool. And it was great to have kind of that experience. The Cubs won as well, and it was a super fast game. The last two games they played have averaged about 2 hours and 20 minutes, which is
Mhm.
good or bad. For me, it's good because again, at this point, I'm not really invested in what the results are. So I'm like, hey, just let's get the game over quick, and give me time to kind of walk around. But no, I mean, again, this season, the kind of the end of it officially has been a long time coming, and so I think if nothing else, I'm happy to pull the plug on the Cubs' potential contention, just so we can sort of say, okay, yep, we know what this is now, and now we can look forward versus kind of seeing them continue to try to win these futile games.
Well, and giving us hope, right? I mean, and that's the thing is there was hope. And I mean, if you look at the second half of the season for the Cubs, they right now are at a winning percentage of 561, which when you look at the standings would have them at the same record as the Arizona Diamondbacks had they done that over the entire season. So it's just kind of weird, like how the whole season has transpired. I mean, we'll have plenty of time to break it all down. I don't have all the information here with me in front of me to break it down right now. So just observing more than anything, and we'll talk about it on another show. But it's just like the second half, they did play pretty well. I mean, you look at their run differential and it's plus 62. I mean, there are some good things that they've done. And I know people are kind of jumping on Craig Counsell and making comparisons between him and David Ross, which I don't think are necessarily fair. And I think that Craig Counsell has done as good a job as he could have done, but the real question remains like, what is going to happen in the offseason? What is I assume Ricketts wants a winner, but I think he would rather make money more than he wants to win. I think making money from the Chicago Cubs is more important to Tom Ricketts than winning. And if he can make money and lose as long as he's making money, I think he's okay with that. And so then where does that leave Jed Hoyer in terms of his job going into next year? Feels like Jed's kind of done what he could do, right? Which isn't much. He hasn't really produced anything really at all. And he hasn't been to the playoffs once. And so what do you think is going to happen in the offseason in terms of Jed Hoyer, his job, and what we see there?
I mean, I think I'm with you on that, right? I think if push came to shove, Tom Ricketts would rather lose and I'll say I don't not necessarily lose, because I think what they really want at the end of the day is this concept of plausible competitiveness, right? Because as long as because we've seen it. I mean, for a couple of years, part of that was the COVID rebound, but when the Cubs were like truly bad and we knew they were going to be bad, people didn't show up in the same manner. But when they're competitive and when they're playing pretty decent baseball, at least, and they've got a semblance of a chance at least, then the people will show up, and they just really need to have it half full in order to at least break even. So if they're 3/4 full, then they're more than breaking even. So again, I think it's he doesn't necessarily. I think Ricketts does want a winner, but I don't think he really cares so much about whether they make the playoffs or not, right? Even though they would make more money from that, and I think he'd rather
exciting. I mean, it's not like he wants to purposely wants to lose.
Right. It's nothing like that, because then they will, the money will go down. But I think if the choice was win, like meaningfully, but lose money doing it because you've got to pump more into the payroll and whatever may come with that, or be mildly competitive, don't make the playoffs, but you made money. I think he'd much rather have the latter, because this is a business. They purchased it as such, despite all the things that he'll say. It's an investment. And he's, to my face, said that, right? And I so I mean, that's what it's about. That was a few years ago, but I still think that holds up. And so my concern with what they do in the offseason comes down to a couple different things, and it's largely that, barring some really, really difficult decisions. I mean, a lot of this comes down to, what does Cody Bellinger do? Because if he comes back, if he opts back in, there's nobody's gone. Every single one of their main players is still locked in for next year. Yeah. So if the improvement's got to be internal
players, because Hendricks is gone, right?
Right. Hendricks will be gone. So you've got a pitching spot open, but
you're going to have to fill that.
Right. But when we look at, outside of Cade Horton, who's been hurt the entire second half, and who knows what happens there. And I mean, you got Ben Brown, who should be healthy, and we hope. But when you look at their 6 top prospects, only one of them is a pitcher. The others are all hitters. All of them are at AAA. You can't just keep running these guys out there at AAA who are ready to be major leaguers. You can't just hold them up and say, like, who knows? We'll just leave you down here and see what happens. Use you as an injury replacement, which is what they've done in the past, right? We look at Alexander Canario is a great example, and he's a guy who I firmly believe they wanted to trade him before he got that really terrible injury with the broken ankle and the broken collarbone in the Winter League a couple years back, right? Because they couldn't, right? Because then he got hurt, and then he never really had a spot because then other guys came up and they kind of screwed up there. Nelson Velasquez, another one who they kind of dicked around with, didn't really use him properly, ended up trading him, and now he's kind of been drummed out. But Owen Casey doesn't have anything left to prove at AAA. Matt Shaw doesn't have anything left to prove at AAA. Kevin Alcantara, maybe not either, right? I would argue also that Moises Ballesteros could come up and hit major league pitching right now, but he's more of a DH type, given his just kind of where he fits from a positional standpoint. But you don't even have room for one of those guys, and you can't just call him up and sit him on the bench, because what good is that? But they also don't have anything left to learn at AAA. So unless they're going to trade Nico Horner and trade Isaac Paredes and Cody Bellinger opts out, I don't know what you do with those guys. They're not all going to come up. They're going to have to trade some of them too. But I'm very concerned with how Jed Hoyer, who seems to be kind of a hoarder, we could call him Jed Hoarder, because he doesn't seem to like to part with people. At least now, which is weird because he's the one that traded all the guys before. So maybe I'm just making that up. But I do think they hug prospects too tight. So I don't know. Maybe he will be fine trading away some of these guys to make room for the young folks. Who knows? It was a very rambling response to it. I guess my point is there are
Well,
multiple levers to be pulled and buttons to be pushed, but I think they've got to be pulled and pushed in the correct sequence, or you risk really screwing some things up.
well, you mentioned Isaac Paredes, sorry. And that trade right there is just a head scratcher. And so it's like, I'm not sure how much I trust Jed Hoyer trading away prospects just based on that trade alone. Because, I mean, is Paredes a better player than Christopher Morel? I mean, time will tell. I mean, I think he performed slightly better than him in the second half. I haven't looked at what Morel has done, but it didn't feel like that much of an upgrade.
I got roasted by a ton of people on Twitter when I put that out there. When I said it felt like a lot to give up for what I thought was kind of a lateral move, right? Like it to me, it raised the floor, but it lowered the ceiling, right? Because we know what Paredes is, and it's
Which
I also
doesn't make
like
sense to do.
yeah, and like given where they were, I guess to me the other thing was if if Morel continues to suck, okay, cool, then you move him for something, have some kind of trade, and then you open up that spot for Matt Shaw, maybe to come up and play, right? But as it is now, it's like, okay, well, now you made this trade, you dealt away. Not to mention, I mean, Hunter Biggie had come up and looked pretty good. The other guy that they
shot, and then what's going to happen with Paredes?
Right. I mean, like to me though, like did you make that as a same? Which is also funny because like in 2 consecutive years at the deadline, they made moves for third baseman, both of whom they traded away to the Tigers a few years ago. For Alex Avila and Justin Wilson. Right. It was Jamer Candelario and Isaac Paredes both got traded up there, and the Cubs had to reacquire both of them. And Jamer worked out really well for like 2 weeks or whatever, and then he completely fell off the face of the earth. And Paredes had kind of some ups and downs, and was kind of up for a little bit and then back down, has been nicked up lately. But do they just end up moving on from him, right, and flipping him because again, if you ask me, I'm doing it every day of the week and twice on Sunday. If you're saying who do you want over the next 3 years, Paredes or Shaw, I'm going Shaw all day long.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Younger, cheaper, and again, a much higher ceiling to me, right? And I also look at Paredes, and he's supposed to have had the biggest difference there. I mean, yes, there's supposed to be less swing and miss than there was with Morel, which is kind of a given. But Morel was so atrocious defensively that automatically you're going to have this. But then we saw this dude come in and make like 3 errors in one game and look just as lost, right? I mean, like, what are we doing here? Like, if the bat's not going to play, that was one game, but I just don't. Again, I'm not in favor. This is not a team. This is a team filled with high floor guys. Right now, can Suzuki be like this elite hitter? He's been tremendous since moving into the DH role. But is he an elite? Is he a superstar hitter? No. Cody Bellinger getting paid $27.5 million. Is he a superstar hitter? Nope. Ian Happ, maybe having the best offensive season of his career. Is he a superstar hitter? Nope. They have a bunch, Dansby Swanson. We could go through the entire list. They have a bunch of perfectly fine, very good, good to very good players. And even very good would be, a bit of a stretch. They don't need to continue adding other moderately good to good players. They need to find great players, superstar players, even just one. That's what it takes. They do not have that right now, though. I don't think they have that coming up for the minors. But if I had to bet on it, I would put much greater odds on Matt Shaw or Owen Casey or Kevin Alcantara or one of those guys potentially having that than I would any of the guys they've currently got on the roster. Mm-hmm. So you have to see what you've got. Either that or you got to package multiple of those guys together and go find that dude who you think can be that star player on your team. Because I'll tell you what, man, I'm not trying to compare. I know there's no way they could have gotten Ohtani, but you look at that Dodgers lineup and you look at Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman at the top. The Cubs don't have one dude who can hold a candle to any of those three, let alone all three of them. And say like there's nobody scares you in this lineup, right? Who's that dude who, if everybody else is kind of falling short, is going to be out there and picking them up?
And if there's one thing we know, that's what was successful about the Cubs when they won the World Series in 2016, because they had Anthony Rizzo and Javier Baez and Chris Bryant, and I mean, it's just they just don't have anyone that you have to pitch around, right? There's no one in the lineup that you've got to worry about in any way, shape, or form, and feel like you can't go right after. And as long as that's the case, heck, they can be over 500. But for them to get to a point where they're not just qualifying for the playoffs, but actually have a team that can win in the playoffs, you need those guys.
Yeah, like at least, like you don't need two or three, but you need one. But like Soto's not coming to Chicago. Maybe I'd love to eat my words, but I look at this, and here's the other wild thing, right? Look at both Chicago teams, and obviously we could look at to the South Side and compare and say, well, the Cubs are clearly at least much better than this, but the Cubs have never signed a contract bigger than Jason Hayward's $184 million. Right? It's like Hayward and then Swanson and then Lester. They've never gone more than $200 million for anybody. Yep. Are they going to go from $184 million to $500 or $600 million for Juan Soto? Are they going to make that kind of a jump? I cannot imagine it. And that's why, but the White Sox, here's the crazy thing. The White Sox have never signed a deal greater than $75 million, the one they got for Andrew Benintendi, which is just abysmally bad. But, I look at this too, and I see there's talk about them maybe trying to go and get, Corbin Burns, right? Former Brewer. I think a lot of that's mostly because of the ties to Craig Counsell. Right, but he'll be a free agent. But if you've never done a $200 million deal, are you going to do that for a pitcher heading into the wrong side of 30?
Exactly.
Whose strikeout numbers have come down, and when you do, who gives a shit if you got better pitching if you can't score? But anyway,
the Cubs need to sign somebody who's on their upward trajectory, and they keep doing this. And Jed Hoyer keeps doing this. And he keeps trying to get cute with this. And that's where, when you talk about, are they going to sign someone for $500 million and make that jump? I just want to know. I just want clarity as a fan. Is this on Jed or is this on Ricketts? Just tell me, like, who is stopping the Cubs from going out and signing that big free agent? Is Ricketts saying no? And then Jed has to kind of do what he can with whatever the guidance is from the top, or is it Jed that's saying I can do it a different way and trying to get cute? That's what we don't know.
I think it's both. That's the only problem is I do believe there is, and oh man, I'm going to try to not go down this rabbit trail, but it still pisses me off to no end that they spun this yarn about going over the luxury tax when they signed Cody Bellinger. And being comfortable with that, because there is nothing dumber. And I've made this analogy before, but it's like shooting a shot with your toe on the 3-point line. Like, what the hell are you doing? Step 2 inches back and that thing's worth 3. If you're willing to if you're going over and barely stepping into that penalty range, what the hell was the point?
Yeah, exactly.
Save some of your money then. That's just stupid. If you're going to go over because the penalties are still going to be the same. Whether obviously they go up the higher you go, but like, why only go over by $1 million when maybe another 5, 10, 20 million?
Was that a mistake?
Yes, I firmly, but I think it's them covering their ass.
They mess up.
Yeah, because it's really stupid to have come out. If that was the point, if that was true, why are we hearing about it 7 months later? Right, when they couldn't, and then clearly they were trying to. I mean, that's what putting Drew Smyly on irrevocable waivers was about. They wanted to cut some of that money off of there. But if that was also the case, like, why the hell didn't you just make a stronger move to trade him? Why not just try to get rid of him? Why not move some of these other dudes? I mean, that's, they got rid of Neris, but that didn't really help because that was all guaranteed, and it's not like anybody else is taking them off their hands. But
yeah,
you could have signed some more multi-year guys, but anyway, back to that. I mean, does some money get freed up? Do things become more likely if Bellinger opts out because his money falls off, Hendricks' money falls off, some of the dead money from the bad signings they have, that falls off. But, I do think there is a limit to what Ricketts is willing to spend. And we know for a fact that Jed Hoyer is opposed to these mega deals. So it's both. So I guess which one, let me throw this back at you. Which do you think is more likely? A, that Ricketts would okay the pursuit of a $500 million contract, but Jed Hoyer says, no, I don't think that's the right option. Or B, that Jed Hoyer is saying, man, we need to go get Soto. We need to spend $500 or $600 million. And Ricketts is like, nope, won't do it. Which of those two do you see as being the more likely scenario?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, like it's hard to see either of those.
Yeah, I think it's both of them were like looking at each other. To me, it's like, man, that's a little bit too much, don't you think? Yeah, I agree. Let's go spread that money around for a bunch of mediocre dudes instead.
Yeah,
like,
with no power,
threading the needle. Hoyer, I think, and this is oversimplifying it, right? So I want to put that out there, but I believe Hoyer loves the idea of threading the needle, wants to thread the needle. I think he wants to be, as you said, to be cute, to feel smart, like he beat the system somehow, that he found this competitive advantage somewhere to leverage rather than just buying a team. Again, I'm oversimplifying it with some of those terms, right? But I think that's how he likes to operate.
It's like he wants to be looked at as, like Theo was looked at when Theo first did it with the Red Sox, right? Like, kind of using the analytics and finding a way to win, in a way that was different maybe than had been done in the past, even though they still had big free agents on those teams, those Boston teams. I just don't think there's any way to get it done. The current makeup of the team, I agree. The Cubs need 2 or 3 guys on the team that have 30 plus home run potential.
Yeah, and who is that outside? Like, I really think Suzuki could be that guy. I almost wonder if playing right field got in his head. Well, I mean, I think playing right field did get in his head. I mean, we saw some just atrocious play from him out there, but then I think that almost, I don't know if that hurt him offensively because he's a dude. You remember last year, and he was really screwed up. And David Ross sat him for a few days. He was awesome, and since he's moved to the DH role, he's got something like close to a 160 WRC plus. He could be that dude, but even then, okay, that's your DH, right? And that's not it's not like we're talking this big improvement over what he's been, what he is, but who else do you have?
DH.
Yeah, I mean, and if you've already got, if your first baseman, and Michael Busch has been really, really good defensively, and he has some pop, but I think 20 to 25 maybe is where he's at. Paredes can get to 30, but you could have a couple of those guys, but I just don't see, there's not, outside of Pete Crow Armstrong, there's nobody on this team right now who is truly like game-changingly dynamic in what they do. And to your point from earlier, Javier Baez could change games in a number of different ways. Defensively, at the plate with his legs, Chris Bryant with his power, with his base running, Anthony Rizzo, platinum gold glover over at first, was the most consistent dude ever. As far as like production, you could pretty much be like, all right, he's going to hit, 30 home runs, 25 to 30 home runs. He's going to bat close to 300. He's going to walk more than he strikes out, and he's going to play great defense. Like you could just pencil that in. And then you had some of those game changer type guys. Crow Armstrong legitimately, and I'm not, hey, anybody can go out there and hit a home run at a big point, whatever. But PCA is like the only one that they've got who I could look at and be like, that's the dude who can make a kind of play that nobody else can. that changes a game, that turns it around, that gets in the other team's head. You know, like when Javi used to be, he'd draw pickoff moves when he was standing on first base still. PCA is that kind of guy that you've got to be scared of for what he can do. He gets in other teams' heads. Nobody else on this team gets in other people's heads.
No.
They're not worried about, oh, how do we throw to Hap? Look, and Hap's very good. He's so underrated, in my opinion. I think Cubs fans continue every year to just shit on this guy. And all he does is continue to go out there and put up tremendous numbers. But again, as you said, they need that guy. Like who's the face of this team right now? In your opinion, who is the guy that you'd pick and be like, yeah, that's the guy?
Yeah.
When I say Cubs,
that's a good question, actually. Like, you have to think about it. I mean, Pete Crow Armstrong, I guess, but I'm guessing a lot of like the casual Cubs fans don't even know who he is. Right.
But if you were asking, but think about it. So like, I bet you could poll 10 Cubs fans and get 5 or 6 different answers.
Probably.
But if you ask somebody who's not a Cubs fan, what are they saying?
Oh, yeah.
Who do they think it is? Because I gotta sit back and think. I was like, is it Imanaga? You know, like the newest guy there?
Hap?
Because I mean, it's probably Hap, just because he's the longest tenured, at least among the position players.
Yeah.
And you know, he's got the gold gloves. He's got all-star credentials. But and this is no disrespect to Ian Happ, who again I think is a great baseball player. He's excellent. But if that is your best player,
yeah, that's the problem. Is
Dansby
that
Swanson, you know,
the Cubs need 3 of those 30+ home run players and Ian Happ and Dansby Swanson, right? You get that 2 or 3 of those top line guys you've got to pitch to or pitch around, and then add it to this lineup, and then we're talking, right? Like, and it feels like that's going to have to come from the system. And then if it has to come from the system, we know it's not happening next year, right? Because you're not going to have a young guy come up. I don't see any guy in our system that's going to come up and hit 30 home runs next year. I mean, there's potential there, but there's nobody you can look at and be like, that guy's a superstar on day one, like you could with Chris Bryant.
Well, and even then, even if you could, where's that guy playing? Unless, you know, and unless they trade Nico Horner or Paredes, or they figure out a way to get around Happ or Suzuki's no trade clause.
Yeah.
You know, and Bellinger opts out. Like a bunch of, because again, even if Bellinger opts out, which I still think there's a fairly good likelihood of, despite what Bob Nightingale reports.
Do you
just
think
because
he's
only
going to
got
opt out?
2 years. I mean, he's only got 2 years left. I think he could get, you know, 3 years and 60 million, 4 years at 80 million. I mean, I think he's probably more. I think he would be targeting more the longer term security than what he's got over 2 years. And who knows? Part of it may come down to, like, he knows basically he's done right field before. Does he want center field? Does he prefer that? Like, could I get paid more as a center fielder? Probably. You know, certainly more than as a right fielder. You know, with somewhat limited power. But I hope he opts out. I think the Cubs desperately hope he opts out. But if he doesn't, again, like, where's that coming from? Like, I have no idea, because that, again, we look at this dude and what he's got, you know, 18 homers. He was hurt quite a bit. But, you know, I mean, maybe he missed out on 3 or 4. But I mean, at this point, I think you're looking at a ceiling of maybe 25 for him, right? Like, they've got, and if that's the case, these dudes all come back. Like, realistically, Ian Happ, if he hits another home run, he'll have a career high, but that would be 26, right? Suzuki, and he's missed some time, but I would put his ceiling at maybe 30. Bush is 20 home runs. Again, 30 to me would be a stretch. Bellinger, not a 30 home run guy anymore, I don't think. Swanson, probably 20 is the cap there.
No,
So they got
no,
a bunch of these guys, but none of them, like we're looking at Dansby Swanson currently leads the team. I'm looking at Fangraphs, 3.9 WAR, which is pretty incredible after the horrid start that he had, that he's leading them. But a lot of the defensive metrics are built in there, and he's still been tremendous over there at shortstop. But if your top dude finishes a season around 4 WAR, and they have 4 guys at 3.2 or higher. Swanson, Happ at 3.7, Horner at 3.5, Suzuki 3.2. Right? But that is all pretty good. That's not, when we look at the rest of if I go all teams, right? Let's see how many guys. So I said 3, what was Swanson? 3.9. 3.9. He ranks 20. He's tied with Corbin Carroll for 27th in baseball. So there are 26 players who are better than that. A whole roster, literally a whole. Now, granted, you can't just take it that way, but their top dude. And if we look at it, look at that. Freddie Freeman from the Dodgers at 4. Mookie Betts at 4.4. And then Ohtani's at 8. Ohtani's got more than twice as much WAR as any Cub. Bobby Witt Jr. is at 10.1. Aaron Judge at 10.4. Now, that's insane, right? But Gunnar Henderson, 8. Juan Soto, 7.9. Again, Soto, literally twice as much as any Cub that is out there.
Yep.
And we could look, again, the younger players. Vlad Guerrero Jr., who, there was some talk about, 5.4. Ellie De La Cruz over in Cincinnati, 6.5. So basically 50% higher-ish, right, than who they've got. Bryce Harper at a 5 WAR. Being paid moving forward through the duration of Dansby Swanson's career, Dansby Swanson will make more actual payroll per year than Bryce Harper. So take that for what it's worth, but they don't.
Bryce
I don't
Harper
think they
doesn't have that WAR based on his defense, and that's the other thing, right? Is that we're talking about. You look at Dansby Swanson, his OFF is offense 1.7. His defense score is 17. So it's like his defense is just so good that's why his WAR is 3.9. You take that away, and his offensively, like I don't even know if he's got a positive WAR. I mean, maybe he does, but it's not very much.
Maybe not by much. And that's the other concerning thing is how long does that last? Right? Like where does that come in? And if you look at look at offensive score, Bryce Harper 32.8. He's 12th in baseball, right? Which, and I know some people could argue that, but Harper, if you look at that Phillies team that has been winning lately, that has a ton of personalities, unquestionably, right? And we're talking about a team that's got like big personalities, Kyle Schwarber and Nick Castellanos, right? But you ask, who is the face of the Phillies? Unquestionably, it is Bryce Harper. Harper, and then a big gap. And then some other dudes, again, with big personalities. These aren't just shrinking violet wallflower type dudes who don't do big things. Like Schwarber set the record for leadoff home runs this year. It's kind of wild that Ohtani didn't, but I don't know. Maybe he wasn't leading off the whole time, or he hits them later in games or whatever. But that's the thing, right? Is among other stars, his shines brighter. Ohtani, right? Like you could put Ohtani against anybody, and it's going to be him. But again, Mookie Betts, former MVP, Freddie Freeman. I think he was the MVP with the Dodgers or with the Braves, wasn't he? Does he have an MVP? Either way, he's very, very good and will probably be in the Hall of Fame. But it's, again, Ohtani and a big, giant gap. You look at New York, even with Juan Soto, it's Aaron Judge, and to me, a big gap. And then Soto. Yeah. So, like, Soto deserves that chance to me, but then Soto was behind Harper. I mean, all these guys.
He's a free agent. Soto is a free agent this year. And so, like, let me tell you, Soto, that would make a difference. I mean, comparing between, obviously it'd make a difference. I mean, if you look at 2023 versus 2024 on offense as a team, the Cubs were worse across the board. Average, on-base percentage, slugging, runs per game, home runs a game, and Ks. I mean, it's just, and WAR, obviously. And so but the record is going to be pretty similar. They had 79 losses last year, and they've got 73 right now. So they're going to end up with a pretty similar record. And you just kind of wonder if the Cubs could have signed a bigger free agent and had just like you said, one more bat in the lineup that's getting 5 WAR or more. Like what the difference would be, and the difference would be that the Cubs, I think, would be right there in the playoffs, probably the wild card, and have a chance to compete for the division. And it's not happening. And so it's what's going to make them make that next step.
Let me ask you this question, and this is a pretty simple one to answer. Would the Cubs be better if they had a third baseman with 5.2 WAR, 26 homers, batting 250-ish with a 121 WRC plus? Would
Definitely.
they be a much better team with that player?
I think they would be. Do you?
I do. And Matt Chapman was a dude who I think, easily could have signed. I know they easily, because I wrote multiple times about them potentially being interested in Matt Chapman, or how they should be interested in Matt Chapman. I compared Chapman to Bellinger in terms of saying I would rather sign Chapman than Bellinger, largely because if you look at their numbers, Chapman had a really down offensive year last year. Bellinger obviously was way up. Bellinger had some kind of crappy batted ball numbers that portended a downfall. A lot of people attribute that to his 2-strike approach, and that is certainly part of it. But Chapman, on the other hand, had tremendous batted ball numbers and just had a lot of bad luck. And I thought that portended a big bounce back for him. So now you've got an elite, right back and forth with Nolan Arenado in terms of like maybe the best defensive third baseman in baseball. And the dude's hitting 26 bombs, scored 95 runs, 75 RBI, 15 stolen bases. I mean, we don't need to compare that to what Cubs third basemen have done, but I'm going to go ahead and say it's a hell of a lot better than what the Cubs have gotten at third. Now,
and the AAV, Chapman's AAV is basically the same as Bellinger's. It's a longer contract, right? I mean, and it doesn't have these options in there because it's a 6-year deal for 151 million. But
it is now, but they just extended him. It was smaller. It was a much shorter deal initially. It was kind of like what Bellinger signed, and they just extended him. So his initial deal.
It was 3 years, 3-year, $54 million contract.
Yeah,
right.
You just like
3 years, $54 million. Oh God, that's you're right.
You could have thinking about that. Which would you rather have? Like Bellinger's a good dude, great dude, awesome teammate. But would you rather have Bellinger for 3 years and 70 million or whatever, or Matt Chapman for 3 years and 54? Like, it's not even close. It's just, especially knowing that, and again, but to do that and to have that put them into the luxury tax penalty, and to have him possibly opting back in and kind of hosing up some things from just, if Bellinger opts out, I think it becomes less of a point. But I feel like, again, this is a situation where Hoyer maybe got a little bit too cute. I think Scott Boras got a little bit too cute too, because both of those guys were like, Chapman ended up playing himself into a tremendous extension, whereas Cody Bellinger, it's like, crap. Is he going to opt back in? Can somebody please throw more money at him than what the Cubs are going to give him? So he will. It just, and that's one of those deals. It's not as if it was a flip of the coin for them. But I also think part of that had to do with the idea that, and we knew this from the start, at least some of us felt this way, that them trying to kind of make Christopher Morel third baseman happen, like that experiment should not have lasted nearly as long as it did, but they kind of hosed themselves into it because of some other injuries and everything else, right? And they just played that for so long until finally, we talked earlier about that trade. It's like, I think it just got to the point where they were just so fatigued by it. They were like, we just got to get rid of this dude. Like, we don't have any place to play him now. And I think Jed overplayed his hand. I think he made a mistake in free agency, because they could have had a better player on a cheaper deal. But I guess we'll see how it plays out. But it's just kind of jacked.
Well, as you can all tell, and I'm sure you all agree, there's going to be quite a lot to talk about this off season. And it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. I think it'd be fun to do, and we should do this in a future episode, is just like a position by position breakdown for the Cubs, what it looks like going into next season and maybe do some speculation around that. That could be fun and could be very interesting, actually. But as you say, right, as you're pointing out, I mean, it doesn't feel like the Cubs have a lot of flexibility unless they start trading guys who are in their lineup.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. I mean, that's when you talk about those tough decisions. I mean, I think there's the Bellinger option is the first domino, and we'll know about that within a week of the World Series concluding, right? But then it just comes down to like that's the only way. Every as of right now, all of their main position players are under contract, or at least could be under contract, depending on, again, Bellinger's choice, for at least the next year.
Yeah.
So that's, again, so unless you're going to do what they did the whole time before and just cross your fingers and hope that the guys from your roster do better next year, which is a really crappy strategy, like just cross your fingers, hope they do better. Unless you're going to make some changes, like the trades are going to have to happen one way or the other. So that'll be definitely what we're following.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's been a good has it been reuniting? No, I don't know if we've reunited necessarily because we've never not been united, but we've coming back together again and doing the show again. We're going to try to do a show probably once every couple of weeks. You know, we might do an emergency podcast here and there, just depending on kind of what's going on and breaking news and things like that. But for now, I think we're just planning on doing one show every couple weeks. So you can find us on your favorite software platforms, and we should be on most of them. And if we're not, and if you need us on one of them, just let us know. We'll make sure we're on there. But it's been a good show.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to get back at it. Hopefully, the people feel the same way, and then we'll just kind of, I guess, try to be as regular with this as possible, right? And kind of maybe it'll give us something to do. Maybe it'll take some of the sting out of my tweets moving forward, because I can just kind of get my thoughts out here, and that I won't get so pissy online.
Well, yeah, and might give us something to do to pass the time, seeing as the Bears seem to be just as big of a mess as the Cubs.
Good Lord, yeah. We could just record. You know, we were going back and forth and saying Sunday afternoons. I think it might get to the point where we just say, "What time are the Bears playing on Sunday? Let's record then."
So we don't have to pay attention.
Yeah, or at least in the second half, right? So I don't have to watch them lose. We'll see. It's just it's gonna be might be a long winter.
It will be. All right. Well, until next time, folks. Thanks for joining, and have a good week.